So I've got a few slides. I'll run through a few slides, give us some context, and then we'll jump into natural capital region and build out some actions and step through how that works and why that works. So natural capital region is part of Natural Capital Suite. So there's a series of 5 integrated web apps, and they're really designed about streamlining investment into nature. Natural Capital Region, a product we've been talking about the last couple of weeks, is really about regional investment planning. So coming up with investment portfolios and being able to quantify the benefit of those things, being able to come up with sort of cost benefit strategies to get a good return on investment at that regional planning level. Project is, once you've done that process, down to the individual farm scale. So designing projects on an individual sort of plot scale. Natural capital account is about collectively representing your whole farm natural capital account. So from your cropping and your grazing and your nature restoration collective activities. We go to the last one. Impact is about being able to communicate and do report cards, public-facing sort of web report cards, demonstrating the great work that you've done. And then market is about being able to kind of bring all these things together to have an investable product, if you like, for those who want to invest in nature, to be able to find and discover your projects. So the reason why we have this collective suite is about having a consistent currency across all of these different applications. So we're talking about the same measures of natural capital, and they're represented right from the regional planning scale down to the individual project scale. So we're talking about natural capital region today. So it's really about planning regional nature repair programs to try and get the greatest environmental and social outcomes out of those. So it's really about answering sort of 2 questions. What should I do and where should I do it to get the best outcomes? Or of the historic work that I've done, what's the collective value of that? And often those previous programs have been funded around a particular topic, for example, a water quality topic, but often those water quality benefiting activities also have a bunch of sort of co-benefits that are worth capturing and reporting to get the broader value. So natural capital region really targeted those who are planning, so large scale investment, planning and pitching. So it's kind of federal, state, government, and then operationally regional bodies who kind of deal with this stuff on a very regular basis. So far, we've covered all of Queensland, all of Tasmania, southwest WA, Corangamite in Victoria, and Northern Rivers in New South Wales, and we're developing instances around South Australia as we speak. So natural capital region, we roll this out on a geographic region by geographic region basis so that we can use the best kind of locally relevant data to do that. And what I want to talk to you about today are actions. So the things that we can do on the ground to benefit nature, and essentially how natural capital region works. We represent the condition of the things that we care about, and then we capture these actions, the things that we can do on the ground to impact upon those and quantify what those interactions are. So these are all the things we're familiar with what we do on the ground. Revegetation work or stock management types of activities, right? So that's the on-ground component of an action, but an important distinction in natural capital region is we combine both that on-ground activity and the support surrounding that activity to effectively define what an action is. So that activity might be, we're going to do riparian fencing and revegetation, and this is an example I'll use through today. But the support for that might be, well, in this particular case, we're going to pay for all the materials and labour and implement the solution. And the reason why we want to consider just the on-ground activity plus the supporting mechanism around that is the supporting mechanism has a major impact on the cost, right? And it also has a major impact on the likelihood of adoption of those activities. So just think about 2 cases here for that riparian re-veg action. Activity 1 might be to do riparian revegetation and replanting, and all the costs are covered. So there's a cost component and an adoption likelihood there. Or if we consider another case, well, what if we only funded half of that, we just gave a grant to the farmer. The farmer has to implement the work himself to fund that. So it's cheaper, but the relative adoption is likely to be lower. So that concept, and we'll cover that as we get into the app and go through the example. And these concepts will come up in the app as well, but I just want to flag them here and we'll come back to them again. So each of these actions for each of the measures that we care about, we represent the effectiveness of that action on the measure. And so there's three common ways that we represent that effectiveness. So we can represent it as a yield improvement, and we think about this in terms of a water quality is really where we use it most. So a yield is a kilogram per hectare reduction, for example. And this kind of applies, particularly if you're doing agricultural practice change. I'm going to move to a minimum till activity, and I know from some detailed paddock modelling, it's going to reduce the sediment load by 2 tonnes per hectare wherever I do it. The next one, efficacy, and this is the most common implementation, it's a proportional reduction. So we might say, I'll give an example out of the Reef Trust toolbox today for riparian zone management. So the historic studies there, so riparian replanting will reduce streambank erosion by 30%. So in that case, we're saying, well, what's the initial load of sediment from that stream? And we'll reduce it by 30%. So in a stream where it's a high load, your relative response is high, or it's a low load, so it's a proportional response. And the third one there is fixed load, and this matters for particularly point source type work. So if we're going to do a wastewater treatment plant upgrade, we know that implementing that is going to reduce nitrogen by 50,000 tonnes per year, and it's a fixed load. You know, it's not varying by the area that we might apply it to. So that's the effectiveness concept. Another concept for our actions is, for that effectiveness, how long does it take? What's the response time for that improvement? Yep. And I dropped off talking about response time. So we get the idea of a response time. Some things are slow, some things are fast, some things are immediate. Put rocks in, pour concrete, we get an immediate response. So this matters when you're doing a trade-off of different actions, because you might be really targeting a quick response time. We care deeply about quick changes in water quality in reef catchments, for example, so we might want to fund things that are faster acting, even if they're more expensive. And the last element here is about the relative confidence in that effectiveness and response time. So we've got a kind of a heuristic process here to come up with a confidence scoring around that. So it means we're able to have what's our best estimate of the effectiveness and response time, and we can, the caveat around that then is the confidence that goes along with it. Okay. This is really boring, but it's going to matter. So the first time we have to talk about some of the kind of underlying architecture of how this application works, because it applies to actions. And when we have actions, what we do is create a library of those action libraries. The way that Natural Capital Region works is we have an instance that it covers a geographic region. So let's say that's this grey box. So, and the example I'm going to show you is from the Queensland Murray-Darling Basin. Within that, we have groups, and groups is where you manage your users. You get to do your own stuff in there, run scenarios, create your own action libraries and the like. And sorry, I just got a message that I dropped out, but I'm still there. Anyone want to nod at me? Yeah, I'm still here. Yep. So what we want to be able to do is have at a group level, be able to manage all your activities, but also be able to share actions of libraries across those groups. So for a region, we might have a couple of organisations who want to do their own thing, but they want to share a collective resource of the type of actions that they'll work on. So you've got both your own area and a shared area. So we have this notion of having a master library that's shared and sort of not editable at the local level, but you've got a shared resource there. Okay, that'll hopefully become a bit more obvious. Right. Let's jump in and have a look at the application, right? So Natural Capital Region. So we'll zoom out, you can see where we are. this tiny little region that is about half the size of Victoria, for the Queensland Murray-Darling area. I'll show you that group concept while it's fresh in our mind. So I'm a member of 3 different groups in here, one called Demo, one called Master Library, one called TRUI. So Master Library, I'm going to go into Master Library. All we've got in Master Library under our actions are 2 Master Libraries, positive actions and negative actions. So look at this positive action library. Because I'm a super user, I can set this to be a master library, and this collection of actions is then available and shared across other groups. So if I now go to my TRUI group, I have a look at my actions. You see these 2 master libraries, which have got a little lock next to them. So they're accessible to me. I can use them to run scenarios. I can copy them and then edit them locally to have my own sort of implementation of that. I might have sort of different costs that I want to apply. That's fine, but it's about having that shared resource. That's kind of part of the gig with the Collective Natural Capital Suite. It's about being able to kind of share those skills sort of across organisation where that might be the case. Okay, let's jump in now and build an action. So I've created an action library here called Demo, and I've created 2 actions for riparian fencing. So this first one, riparian fencing and active revegetation, I click on that. So I'm saying this is fully funded. We want this project to be implemented by this local First Nations-led riparian management team. They've got their own nursery set up to be able to supply the plants here. And the idea here is to capture meta information, be able to associate any attachments that support what's going on. So you kind of got this lineage of information. So for this particular action, we're doing riparian, we're going to fence it, we're going to revegetate it. All right, so the action type, we have a range of alternate groupings of action types. So this is a revegetation and restoration grouping. We apply this over of the available land. So in the underlying configuration here, we know how much stream there is, for example, and how much unvegetated stream there is. Realistically, how much of that are you going to try and attempt to deal with here? So this is a really huge area that we're dealing with, this region. So, okay, let's see if we can target 1% of the available land type. And in this case, the land type that we might want to apply this to for these re-veg and restoration style activities, we're going to apply this to the unvegetated riparian areas. So we know across all of those catchments, the total area of unvegetated riparian areas that we could apply this to. And after we've done the action, what should we do with that land? In this case, we're going to retire it. So we're not going to do any more actions on it. But what you might do is transition from one land type to another land type, but let's not worry about that. Most commonly, we do an action and that's all we do on that land. We set our initial costs per hectare and ongoing costs per hectare. And then we quantify how confident we are around those costs. So the cost component, it's really about the data confidence components, really. So it's about how much quantitative information have we got to support this price estimate. How directly does that data support what we're saying? Or what level of extrapolation have we had to apply to this? So I've got some costs from Western Australia, I'm going to apply them here. So we've had to extrapolate a fair way. Or no, we've done this plenty of times locally. No need to extrapolate. We'll end up being quite confident in our costs, right? That's our initial setup attributes. Now we've got to quantify the impacts, the outcomes, if you like, of this activity across all the things that we care about. So the orange ones here, they've turned on where I said there is some impact. So we're doing riparian work, so we're not going to impact on hill slope erosion, but I said we are going to impact on stream bank erosion. And the effectiveness type, I've said is efficacy. So if we remember, that was a percentage reduction. So we're saying we're going to reduce stream bank erosion by 30%. It'll be the ultimate outcome. We're doing active revegetation, so this will be reasonably fast acting for those trees to get established. And then here's our underlying confidence. And in addition to the previous three around the economics, there's a fourth question here is about how mature is the science around this. So we don't really need that for the finance because economics is pretty mature, right? But in this case, this is all very mature because we've been doing it for a long time. So we've jumped up our overall score here. So the question will be, how'd you come up with 30%? And that's kind of the magic, if that makes sense. Is about having worked in this area for 20 years and being able to compile those resources. So work with local organisations who will know some of these, but also with the literature as well. So for this particular example, we're relying on the Reef Trust Stream and Gully Toolbox that Scott Wilkinson and co have put together through multiple editions, effectively reviewing all the available literature about the effectiveness of riparian vegetation on stream and gully erosion rates. And so they've got this case for stream bank revegetation, which includes planting and an ongoing maintenance scheme. We're looking at an effectiveness of 0.3 or 30% reduction in erosion. So we can scroll down and have a look at some of these others that we're impacting upon. So by replanting, we're going to increase the biodiversity score. So in Natural Capital Region, our biodiversity scores are really based on vegetation, extent of vegetation. So we're saying when that area is fully established, it'll be 80% as good as if it was remnant. So it's not going to be as good as old growth, but at the end of the day, we're going to get a good biodiversity score out of that. But we've got a lowish confidence. And our First Nations components here. So this work's going to be carried out by a First Nations team. And so they're integral to the design and delivery of the project. And then on-country values as well. So it's going to have direct, the action occurs on country with direct benefit on country because it is. I don't need to explain that. We're involving the broader community. So we've got a different system of selecting. So this is called a Likert score, but this is really just the same as effectiveness. But the things that we know less well, we can't put in two decimal places here. It's kind of a low, medium, high. So it effectively allows you to kind of rapidly pick that rather than trying to pretend that we know that precisely. So we're going to have some regional economic benefits out of this as well, because we're investing in local people to deliver the local solution. There's going to be some carbon sequestration benefit out of this. We're planting a bunch of trees that are going to be permanent standing, and there'll be some improved kind of land resilience component from the farmer's perspective, where we'll fence, we'll have off-stream watering to a more kind of resilient landscape, if that makes sense. Okay, we'll scroll up here. So we've got all of those different impacts representing it. Now, what's the likelihood of adoption? So great idea. Who's going to turn up if we fund this? And this is where the price plus the action comes into play. So this survey is the CSIRO developed ADOPT method, really developed mostly for voluntary adoption in agricultural areas, but it's the best we can deliver, or kind of the only really that will come up with a nice, consistent quantitative prediction. So there's a series of 22 questions here, and the questions that are around the population. So in this case, we're working with grazing lands. So grazing landholders in this part of the world, what would be their response here? So what proportion of the target population has maximising profit as a strong motivation, from none to almost all? How much do they care about protecting the environment? So you get the sense of how that works. And then there are questions about the practice. So this practice is about revegetation. And so characteristics around that will affect its likely adoptability. And then we've got a series of questions in 2 components here that relate the population, graziers, to the practice, riparian vegetation, and how those 2 things interplay. So you go through this survey, and ultimately it'll predict, in this case, so fully funded, you're likely to get, you might get 80% of farmers, but it'll take you 20 years to get them ultimately, to get them on board. If you've got better local adoption numbers, you can override those scores and put, hey, we've done this before. We're never going to get 80. It's more like 50. Okay. That's cool. So effectively, we've set up the default characteristic for this action to apply to the entire Queensland Murray-Darling Basin area. But that area then has catchments and then subcatchments within them. So we can go through all of those parameters that we set up and then create locally specific values as well. So we might have locally specific cost values. So the further away you are from a major centre, it might cost more, or different effectiveness values, different social outcome values. So you've got this kind of locally specific way to represent things. Not going to go through all of those, it'll take forever, but you get the idea of what's going on there. So that's our action in our action library. Riparian fencing, active revegetation, fully funded. Now I've created a second one here, which is that same activity, riparian revegetation, but instead of being fully funded, we're just going to do a grant to the landholder and they've got to implement it. So they've got to sort of somehow in kind contribute the other half. So in this case, our cost value has come down from 15,000 a hectare to 7,500 a hectare, and no ongoing. And all the other components still, well, no, they don't all stay the same. We get the same erosion benefits, wetland benefits. We won't get the First Nations direct value because they're not engaged in the project, but there might still be on-country values because we're working on streams. Okay. You with me? So if I go back now and have a look at what that looks like in a scenario sense, let's create a scenario using that first project. So before I do that, I thought of another thing that I need to show you. Negative actions. So this concept, so we've been talking about doing positive things. So here's a negative action. If we continue to clear, and this is from the master library, it's grey, so I can't edit it, but I can still use it in a scenario. We're going to do continued vegetation clearing. So in Queensland, we have category X vegetation, which is able to be cleared. So when you do that, you've got decreased biodiversity. Well, I'll show you what it is. So this is ultimately going to be 2% of the available category X. Turns out to be about 1% of the available area. And the impacts here is we're having impacts on these different things. And in this case, our effectiveness is negative. But we might have industry economic, we're going to have some slight increase. So we're clearing this land so you can apply more stock per hectare. Okay, so let's jump back now and have a look at the scenario. First scenario, riparian project, fully funded. I'm doing this everywhere. My positive actions, I've just been in there editing that action, right? So it said, you've run this before, but it looks like something's changed since. So I can update that library. That's good. And I've got 2 actions in here. I just want to do this fully funded one. I could filter those, all that my actions out. Anyway, let's not get too carried away about that. I'm just going to go straight to run. I'm going to click on those other buttons. And this is the collective value of doing, and what I have done in our setup here, I've said we're going to use those realistic adoption levels, right? And so what happens with those realistic adoption levels is when we get down here to the cost component, not everyone shows up immediately. So it takes time to spend that money as people show up. And then ultimately we said 80% of people might show up. We said that we're targeting 2%. So ultimately, of 2% of the available area, I think. So ultimately, no, we said 1% of the available area. So ultimately, 0.8% of the available riparian area will get implemented in that case. Okay, now, so I don't bang on forever. I'm just going to compare it. I run exactly the same again, but with the other action, which was we don't fully fund it. The farmers turn up, but we've also included the much lower, in that case, a much lower adoption rate. It turned out when you redid the survey. So fully funded riparian, but the riparian project, where we're only going to fund half the cost, right? So our ultimate benefit here, so the green ones are the biodiversity. And by the way, the relative thickness you're seeing here, so this is a reflection of the confidence you've got around those predicted numbers. So the less confident you are in the result, the broader that band in the result here. So I'm going to scroll down. You'll see a bit more of what's going on here. So for that first one, we're able to spend ultimately $28 million to do that. When we dial down that adoption rate, we're only getting to $8 million just because no one's showing up. You know, there's a much lower number that will ultimately put their hand up to, you know, to self-fund half the work. So the cash flow deal varies, as well as, of course, the consequences at the end of that. One more scenario. What was I going to do? Oh, negative actions. So I've had no positive actions running, but that one negative action where we're going to do continued clearing. Let's have a look at what that world looks like if I run that. So over time, so we get some benefit here. Economic components, so we showed that, so increased grazing, but some pretty big negative components around this. And then combine those things, right? So back to scenarios, we can have this riparian project. Let's go to the fully funded option and the negative actions, and we end up with, you know, some combination of those things. So you're kind of looking at the collective benefit. I'm going to stop sharing and invite Dave Waters to jump in.
Sure. Yeah, if I could just have a couple of minutes, Nick, I won't speak for long, but I just want to make a few points about libraries. Having sort of worked with a number of people around Australia, I guess, so we'll just share, and I'll use that. You can see a map there of Desert Channel, Queensland.
Yep.
Okay, so 3 points I want to make. First, so yeah, Nick's probably shown there how it's a great way of capturing collectively the things we do on the ground to achieve outcomes. But for me, so there's a couple of examples I'll show you. One, it's also important that you capture the science or the evidence behind that, whether it's an NRM plan, it might be a peer-reviewed published paper, or just as importantly is some of the to highlight that not all the actions about water quality and biodiversity necessarily. I've worked with a number of groups around Australia now, and the feedback from particularly with investors, and you know, Bernie Cockayne could vouch for this, that you know, the social, economic, and the cultural outcomes are equally important, or more important in some cases. That it's not just a water quality and biodiversity game, and that's been a real learning exercise for us. I think the third thing that Nick highlighted, like for all of these actions, the important distinction here of what we're doing is that this allows you to incorporate both cost and the time and the rate of adoption, and also importantly the confidence in those metrics. So I guess the important point here is that we can rapidly assess the outcomes of each of these actions, or a combination of these most effective outcomes for the things we do. But whilst most of these activities you might undertake, you know, someone could with low confidence in the science, but you know, adoption rate might be important, or things might be cheaper. But the point is you can capture all these in this portfolio, and you know, include them in a proposal, if you like. So what I thought I might do is just show you a couple of examples. So this is just as an example. I've used the Desert Channels Queensland instance of natural capital region. So that's about a quarter of Queensland there. You can see where we are in the north of Australia. So if we go to the action library that Nick just showed you there, up on the top right here, you've got resources. Okay, so you can attach any resources you like. And in this example, what they've captured here is one of the activities that is quite extensive in this part of the world is prickly tree control. So they've actually included a link here to a YouTube video that they created for their region about how you control prickly tree, which is important. The second one here is a PDF, a peer-reviewed bit of science that talks about the improving biodiversity in the region. And the third one, which is just important for all of these actions, was the NRM plan, so that people can then go and have a look at the NRM plan and the activities that are funded and show that it's the actions that they're undertaking support their plan. So that's the first point I want to make. If we just, and I thought I'd just show you a couple of actions here that we've included. A couple of these aren't from the region. I've tried to remove the cost just for privacy reasons. But the first one, we'll just, as an example, look at organic weed control. Okay, so there's a lot of detail here that's been captured, which is fantastic. And this is where I encourage technical staff within an organisation, because this stuff is sitting in people's head. This stuff is not necessarily documented anywhere, but it's talking about specifics about cost per hectare and for this organic weed control, there's blade ploughing, cutter bars, really detailed information, which is important. And of course, the YouTube video here of how you do it's captured as well. But in this particular example, it's highly adopted. It's cheap. It might have low water quality outcomes, but high social outcomes. It brings farmers together, and you can capture that in the results here. And so you can see here that the things they care about, the outcome addresses a number of things around water quality, around biodiversity, community engagement, regional economy, and some around land resilience. So that's the first example. The second one is around, we haven't talked a lot in the last few weeks around the sort of urban environment, but that's obviously important as well, because they are, they have a footprint and they impact on the outcomes and the catchment. So this is about funding upgrades to water use, to water circulation distribution systems in Western Queensland, and that's part of the Great Artesian Basin system. And so in this case, there's some details here around where the funding may come from. Important point here, look, it's a really expensive action, but highly social. There's an education awareness program as part of this. And we're really highly confident in the outcomes. It might have a low water quality outcome, but really confident in the outcomes. It's an engineering solution. You're just fixing pipes. So that's the important distinction from the first one. The third one that I'll touch on, this is a really interesting one about, this is something that's occurring in Northern Australia around Indigenous capacity building. Okay, so this is about engaging with First Nations people to break in donkeys, sell them to Southern Australia as guardian animals, and all the information is captured here around the background to this. Important thing here, really high capacity building, really high community engagement, high cultural value, some impact on biodiversity and water quality. But this one's low confidence. It's new science, okay? But you can capture that here, and you can quantify the confidence you have in each of those actions. That's probably all I wanted to say, Nick, was just to highlight that it's not just a simple water quality and biodiversity game, and you can represent all these things. The world is your oyster in terms of what you want to represent around actions, I guess would be my point.
Thanks, Dave. That's probably enough from us.